whenever I talk about options, I inevitably get to exercise an assignment, and admittedly, it is not the sexiest part of options trading. However, it is extremely important for people to understand how this process works because it plays a large part in how P&L is essentially harvested from trades and how the inherent leverage that I talked about at the beginning actually goes into play. It's where the proverbial rubber meets the road. And the leverage that you have from contracts that you're trading in the options space, remember I said one contract oftentimes actually gives you the power to turn it into 100 shares of stock. That process happens through exercise and assignment. It also carries a certain amount of risk with it that people also need to understand. So let's talk about how exercise and assignment works. Option buyers, like I said at the beginning, have rights. Option buyers have rights. Option sellers incur obligations. When you're talking about calls, you have the right to buy the underlying, and generally it's 100 shares of stock at the strike price on or before the actual expiration of that option. This is if you exercise that contract. When I talked about this earlier, I talked about the fact that there are people trading options in a speculative way that might never actually carry an option to its expiration. Those people never exercise their contracts, and that's totally fine. And we want people to be able to trade in a liquid market that has that possibility. However, if you want to carry your contract to its expiration or you want to exercise the contract, this is when you actually get to turn that contract into an underlying stock position. In the case of a call, you would be exercising the contract and turning it into a share position, a long share position that would normally be 100 shares of the underlying. To exercise, however, the buyer has to issue an exercise notice to your brokerage firm. Only option buyers can exercise options. We get a ton of questions about exercise and assignment from people who are long options and are asking questions about being assigned on those contracts. And the answer to that is you cannot be assigned if you are long the contract. If you are long the contract, you have paid the premium for that contract and you maintain the right to exercise that contract and turn it into an underlying position. So if you're long contracts, you are the exerciser. If you are short contracts, you are the assignee, meaning you have to make that contract whole when it happens. One of these things I think is important, AutoX. This process, let's go back. The AutoX process is something that people ask a lot of questions about as well. Generally speaking, contracts that are in the AutoX framework, which is a good portion of the actual contracts out there, are automatically exercised if they meet a threshold at their expiration. That threshold generally is 0.01, meaning if an option is in the money, let's say you have an in the money call. If it is in the money by 1 cent at its expiration, if it's part of the AutoX process, it will be automatically exercised. That means if you're long the 100 call and the stock is trading 100.01 and that option is part of the AutoX process, that option is going to be exercised at its moment of actual expiration. You will incur then a long position in the underlying. Lots of people ask questions about this. What is the threshold? Is it going to be automatically exercised? The other part about this is if there is a corporate action in which things change as far as the visibility of people to understand potentially where the actual underlying is trading, sometimes things get delisted. Sometimes corporate action situations create very opaque trading environments where people don't necessarily understand or know what the underlying is worth. Oftentimes, the options will be pulled out of the AutoX process by OCC per our bylaws, and there'll be an information memo sent out on our public website letting people know this contract is no longer part of the AutoX process. And when you see that as part of your position, you need to understand that those contracts are not going to be automatically exercised, even if they're in the money by $10. Because once you remove something from the AutoX process, it means that we are not as OCC actually going to exercise that contract for you, you have to actually tell your brokerage firm that you want to exercise them. So if you ever see something like that where the calls have been removed from the AutoX process, pay attention to it and ask your brokerage firm what that means for your specific actual position, because that's very important. The exercise process. Remember what I said. If you're long options, you maintain the right to exercise. So what happens when you actually exercise? It starts with you. As you tell your trading firm, or if you happen to be a very large trader, you might have a direct relationship with a clearing member firm. As you tell them you want to exercise, you either tell your trading firm and your trading firm tells the clearing member firm, or you tell your direct clearing member firm, and then the actual exercise notices come in to OCC. Remember what I said about the central clearing facility that OCC creates. It not only creates that within the actual trading process, the buyer to every seller and the seller to every buyer, it also creates that in the exercise and assignment process. So when you decide to exercise your contract, it starts with you and it ends with the OCC. As those exercise notices come in, they are actually put together with the assignment side of things. We'll get to that in a moment. Assignment. Remember, if you're short options, you incur liabilities. You incur the obligation to make the contract whole. In the case of a call, you incur the obligation to sell the stock. In the case of a put, you incur the obligation to buy the stock, but it's generally 100 shares of the underlying, just like on the call side. If you are assigned, when you are short options and your brokerage firm tells you that you have been assigned, that means that someone somewhere on the other side of the central clearing landscape has decided to exercise that actual option. If they're getting long stock, you are getting short stock because you're the person who is making that trade whole. You are incurring the obligation to make the contract whole. Assignment notices are received from your brokerage firm, and only sellers can be assigned. Okay, that's the other side of the coin. If you are long options, you maintain the right to exercise. If you are short options, you are the person who can be assigned. If you're long options, you can't be assigned. And if you're short options, you cannot exercise. This is part of the actual process of the actual trade that happens. The premium that changes hands is because of this process. This is where the rubber meets the road. Now, the assignment process, remember what I said about the actual exercise process. It started with you at the top and it goes down to OCC. When I said all of those exercise notices come in to OCC, they do. They come in and then they are matched up through an actual random process, and the assignment notices go out the door. They follow the exact same pipes, but in reverse order. They start with OCC, they go to the clearing member firm, which then takes it to the trading or brokerage firm, and it ends with the investor or trader. Important to understand what your rights are and what your obligations are per your trades. And this is where these actual option contracts get converted into underlying stock and or commodity and or index actual positions or ETF positions. This is important because this is what you're actually paying for when you buy the options, or what you're actually incurring as a liability when you sell the options. You are saying, I am part of this process and I'm willing to be part of this process, and those are my liabilities, or this is what I'm paying for. This is also what gives those contracts their leverage. Being able to change a contract, an options contract, into an underlying position is why the options exist in the first place. It also is why those options are so flexible in the ways that they are. So what we've done here, I think, is give you a really broad overview from beginning to end as far as what are these things, where do they come from, and how do they actually work as far as exercise and assignment at the very end of their life cycle.